Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to the new semester. We're starting semester 2. This is our first module for this semester, and it's going to be focusing mostly on cell and reproduction, mitosis, meiosis, and stuff like that. We're going to get ready for lesson 1, so without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump right into it. We'll go over the lessons at the end. They're not too heavy this week, so it shouldn't be too burdensome for your first week back. There's only a few things. You're more than welcome to go through the orientation module if you need to remind yourself of anything, or if you're new to class. If you are new to class, make sure you stick around and introduce yourself after we finish this today. All right, so obviously biology, and we are jumping in to the new semester. We're going to be focusing on cell reproduction. You can see a list of our learning objectives for this particular lesson. You can go through those on your own. They're also listed in Canvas. And we are going to focus on cells. So we're focusing on cells and basically how they reproduce, both through mitosis and meiosis. And we'll get into the mitosis, meiosis stuff in later lessons. For this first lessons, we're just kind of focusing on the organization of cells and talking a little bit about stem cells and the different kinds of cells and that type of stuff. So let's go ahead. We're jumping right into the first section, which is the 1.1 of the module. It's simple to complex. So a little basic vocabulary you should be familiar with. You should be familiar with what a cell is, what tissues are, organs, organ systems, cell division, cell differentiation. Make sure you kind of go through those. They're also found on Canvas, so you can kind of go through those definitions. Make sure you have a good understanding of each one as you kind of go through the notes. All right, so let's start off with an introduction. So if you're looking at yourself in a mirror, what do you see? You see basically hair and eyes and skin and different things about your body, etc. But the differences that you see are differences in cells, right? Your skin cells aren't going to be the same as your muscle cells, which aren't going to look the same as the cells that make up, your eye color and so on. So you're actually looking at over 1 trillion different cells organized into a very specific way to allow you to be you, an individual that's different from your friends and even your siblings. Unless you have an identical twin, genetically you're different from even your closest family members, right? This is true for most multicellular organisms. They're composed of many cells that differ in many different ways. They all have different functions. And remember, in biology, as we talked about last semester, shape determines function, right? So the way these cells are shaped is even different, as you're going to see as we go through these notes. Some examples of cellular differences can be seen in the images that you're going to see on the next page. All these cells contain different DNA, but they appear to have different functions. So let's go through some of these different types of cells. What are stem cells? Stem cells are unique cells of the body that basically they're unspecialized, right? They're undifferentiated. They haven't formed into a specific type of cell. Stem cells are really important, especially the stem cell research they're doing now, because they think maybe they can cure people that have paralysis or that are quadriplegics by growing new nerve cells, for instance. They have the ability to develop into specialized cells for specific organs and eventually develop into tissue. So stem cells are able to divide and replicate many times in order to replenish and repair tissue. In the field of stem cell research, scientists are attempting to take advantage of the renewal properties of stem cells by using them to generate cells for tissue repair, as I mentioned before. Then you have a very different looking cell. You got red blood cells. So blood cells are basically their main job. You can kind of see they almost look like donut shape, but the hole's not quite going all the way through. They have that concaved surface on the front of them. And they're basically designed to transport oxygen throughout the body. You have certain white blood cells that are found in here too, and there's none pictured right now, but they also help to fight off infection. Cells of blood are vital to life. There's 3 major types of cells in your blood. The ones pictured here are red blood cells, the white blood cells, and then you have platelets. Red cells determine the blood type and are also responsible for transporting oxygen to the cells. White blood cells are part of the immune system. They help to destroy pathogens, bacteria, etc., that kind of get into your circulatory system or in your body, and they kind of go and fight those off. And then platelets are designed to help clot. So if you get a cut or something like that, They basically kind of clot the wound so you don't lose too much blood. And then fat cells, again, a very different looking cell, right? Fat cells are called adipocytes. These are major cell components of adipose tissue. They contain droplets of stored fat or triglycerides that could be used for energy. So it's long-term energy storage. When fat is being stored, fat cells swell and become round shaped. When fat cells are being used, they kind of shrink up in size. Adipose cells also have an endocrine function. They produce certain hormones that help to influence the sex hormones, metabolism, blood pressure regulation, insulin sensitivity, fat storage and usage, etc. So again, if you look at, and I'm not done yet, but even if you just look at these first few cells, very different shapes because they have very different functions. So let's keep going. Here's another one. These are skin cells. Skin is composed of a layer of something called epithelial tissue. It's actually called simple squamous epithelium, and it's basically there to act as a protective barrier to the external environment, right? And it's supported by a layer of connective tissue called the dermis and the underlying subcutaneous layer. The outermost layer of the skin is composed of flat squamous epithelial cells that are closely packed together, and the skin kind of protects the internal structures of the body from damage, helps to fight off from getting infections, and prevents dehydration. Basically, kind of acts as a barrier between the external environment. It does do some vitamin production as well. And then you have nerve cells, and you can see again, very different shape, right? Long axons and dendrites coming off of the neuron. So nerve cells, or neurons, are the basic unit of the nervous system. Nerve cells send signals among the brain and spinal cord and other body organs via nerve impulses. A neuron consists of two major parts, the cell body and the nerve processes. The central cell body contains the neuron's nucleus, associated cytoplasm, and organelles. And then the nerve processes are these long projections. If you take a look over here, let me see if I can get this. These long projections that you see on these pictures, and these are axons and dendrites, and they basically extend from the cell body and are able to connect with other neurons, or in some cases, if it's at a muscle, it could be a neuromuscular junction, and they send little electrical impulses or signals that can be transported from one neuron to the next neuron, maybe even eventually to a muscle that would cause the muscle to contract, right? So all these cells have very different shapes, very different functions as you go through this. So let's look at how they're organized now. So we're going to start talking about cells and beyond, and how they kind of organize in this hierarchy. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and then be finishing up. So how do cells form organisms? In this section, we're going to look at how organisms are organized, right? If we start with the simplest form of life, the cell, and then how do we get to these more complex multicellular organisms like human beings and other animals, trees, plants, etc. The vocabulary from the beginning of the lesson will provide you some strong clues, so make sure you go through that later. So here's the general hierarchy, and we're even getting into the subcellular level, the non-living level, right? So we can start with atoms, which can form molecules, and then these molecules can form organelles, which are inside the cell. Then we start getting to the basic unit of life, which is the cell. Cells can form tissues. Tissues can form organs. Organs can form organ systems. Organisms are made up of multiple organ systems. And then these organisms can, and we're getting back into the ecology, form populations, which can make communities, ecosystems, and then eventually your biosphere. Okay, so when you're thinking of this, there's a couple of nice activities to kind of click through on Canvas that show all these different levels in a little bit more detail and talks a little bit about it. So make sure you kind of do that. But let's just kind of take, I'm going to start from the organelle. So you could have an organelle like a mitochondria, which is found inside the cell, right? And then multiple cells would make up tissue. So if you have let's see, a whole bunch of cardiac muscle cells, right? They're going to form tissue, or cardiac muscle tissue. And this tissue can eventually form an organ. In this case, it would be the heart, right? Because it's cardiac muscle. And then the heart can be part of the organ system, which would be the circulatory system inside the body. And then the circulatory system, coupled with all the other systems like the respiratory system, urinary system, digestive system, etc., 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 would form an organism. So why is cell division so important? Well, it kind of becomes obvious after we talked about that. All these trillions of cells that make up humans, and uh, another important thing is we're constantly replacing many of those cells. So cell division is important because as it's basically the process that forms the formation of an organism. We start off as a single cell, which gets fertilized, right? And then that cell starts to um, duplicate and reproduce and divide and go through all these cell divisions, and it makes up these different tissues, that make up the circulatory system, digestive system, all these different tissues and organ systems, and it's important for that to occur. So there's several other important tasks that cell division is responsible for as well, and these include development of organisms, the growth, repair of damaged cells. Just think of your skin cells. You're literally losing thousands of skin cells every day. Um, every day you lose thousands and thousands of skin cells, and they have to be replaced with new skin cells. Um, don't believe me? Here's a quick little test. Maybe next time, if you're sitting on a couch cushion or something, and you kind of slap that couch cushion, you see all that dust that kind of goes up in the air. A lot of that is actually dead skin cells from people that were sitting on the furniture, right? So we'll take a closer look at this process of cell division in the next couple future lessons coming up. So what is cell differentiation? Now that's where we're getting into how these stem cells, for example, can become a cardiac muscle cell, or how a stem cell could become a nerve cell, or how it could become a skin cell, and so on. So cell differentiation is how generic cells become specialized. How the cells become specialized is not completely known. It's kind of tricky business. It's cutting edge stuff that they're still researching. We don't quite know what triggers a stem cell, for example, to become a nerve cell as opposed to a muscle cell. So we don't quite have the scientific background yet to understand how every facet of the human body works. What we do know is that specific combination of genes are turned on or off, and it causes that cell to become very specialized, which is basically how it determines how it's going to function, right? What it's going to do. When genes are turned on or off, they interact or don't interact with their neighboring cells and with its extracellular matrix, or ECM. The extracellular matrix is the surrounding environment, including all the fluids and particles and connective tissues and so on. So for a quick example, when a muscle cell's genes that encode the contractile proteins for actin and myosin, which is basically these filaments that slide past each other to cause the muscle to contract, are activated, but the gene encoding for insulin synthesis is inactivated, this can happen when a cell gets a signal from the environment, right? And it can cause the muscle cell to kind of basically do the function of contracting and moving the skeletal system or your body around, right? Um, Receptors on the cell will bind to specific molecular elements in the extracellular matrix, and this binding activates intracellular signals or transduction pathways that turn certain genes on or off. As a result, these interactions, some genes can be expressed and given the cell, but others cannot. So it kind of helps these cells become what they're supposed to do, right? A muscle cell or a nerve cell or a kidney cell, or you name it. So some cells, for example, skeletal muscle cells and nerve cells, become terminally differentiated. This kind of means that their ability to become different types of cells is permanently lost. Um, when you're born with all the neurons you're ever going to have. We can't replace them. They can't become something else. So although they continue to perform their specialized function for a long time, in order to gain a better understanding of these concepts, you'll have to read more information on the stem cells below. And then there's some short videos on Canvas for you to look at that are going to help you kind of understand this. So the cells that are undifferentiated are stem cells. And the stem cells can be triggered genetically as well as environmentally to become a muscle cell, or to become a nerve cell, or to become a kidney cell, or a skin cell, or whatever it might be. Cells that lose their ability to differentiate or become different cells may not be able to divide to fix themselves. So when this happens, that's all they have. So going back to our neurons, as I said, you're born with all the neurons you're ever going to have, and you can only from the point of birth forward um, lose neurons and never really gain any more. So how do we become smarter? Well, intelligence is a little bit different. We're forming memories and connections and learning and synapses between the cells. That's basically learning. Not that we're gaining more brain cells. We're just forming new connections within our brain and figuring things out, right? That's how we learn. But going back to the nerve cells, if somebody gets injured, right, they have an accident and sever their spinal cord in their neck area, well, they're not going to be able to move their arms and legs if the injury is severe enough. And that can't repair itself. So a spinal cord injury that leaves a person paralyzed can't be repaired. Now, the exciting part about stem cell research is that they have the ability to become any type of cell. There's a lot of research in the field to find new ways to kind of trigger them or initiate the stem cells to become a nerve cell and then treat injuries and diseases that affect so many people, such as a person with a spinal cord damage. If we can trick the stem cells to becoming new neurons and then somehow place them into that person to treat them, we could actually have them repair the damaged tissue. So doctors could help that person grow maybe a new section of their spine to repair the damage. And then there's a short video on Canvas that you need to look at that kind of explains this, and it kind of goes in line with one of the assignments that we're going to discuss next. All right, so here's your assignments this week. They're all due this week. Make sure you do the Check for Understanding quizzes. I believe there's only one Check for Understanding this week, so it's a little bit of a short lesson. And then you have two quick lessons. Assignment 1.2 is levels of organization presentation. We'll go over that a little bit on Friday so you guys can have a little bit better understanding, and we'll probably make that due. I think it's set for Sunday, but I might push that back a little bit and give you a little bit extra time since we're going to be going over it on Friday. Maybe I'll make it due next Wednesday or something. And then there's a discussion for 1.2 on the stem cell debate. After you look at those videos I just mentioned on the previous slide, make sure you fill out the discussion board writing prompts and kind of discuss that. You guys have been doing really well with that, those that have been doing it. All right, guys, so that's about it for this week. That kind of takes us through our very first lesson of semester 2. Hopefully you guys are having a good start to the new year, and we will be seeing you soon. Have a good day.